Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Deuteronomy chapter 17 in a clear and simple way, step by step. I am so thrilled to guide you through this explainer today because what we're looking at is honestly a masterpiece of ancient law. We're going to examine the actual blueprint for how a civilized, ethical, and just nation was originally meant to operate. Chapter 17 is incredibly well structured. It covers everything from the most personal, intimate acts of worship all the way up to the highest halls of supreme power. It establishes this brilliant system of checks and balances that feels, well, surprisingly relevant even thousands of years later. So here is our agenda. Following the Hebrew text strictly in order, we'll cover unblemished sacrifices, idolatry and witnesses, the judicial court, laws of the king's scroll, and finally, some practical lessons. Let's walk through this masterful system together. Before we hit verse 1, let's just quickly set the stage. Imagine this. The Israelites are standing right on the precipice of entering the lands they've been promised. They're transitioning from a wandering group of people out in the desert into a fully settled nation. And to survive and thrive in this new land, they need absolute order. They need a clear legal system and an unwavering commitment to their covenant with God. Grounding ourselves strictly in the simple, literal meaning of the text, we're beginning with a chapter that outlines the core ethical and legal framework for the Israelites entering the land. Basically, the laws here answer the big societal questions. How do we worship? How do we handle complex crimes? And ultimately, who is actually allowed to rule over us? Okay, let's dive into section 1, unblemished sacrifices, giving your best. Now, you might be wondering, why does a chapter about supreme courts and kings start with animal sacrifice? Well, it's because the relationship with God is the absolute foundation of everything else. Verse 1 gives a very direct command. It says, "Do not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep that has any defect or flaw in it, for that would be detestable to him." This demands that any offering must be absolutely perfect. Think about what this actually meant practically for an ancient farmer, right? Your flawless ox is by far your most valuable asset. The temptation to keep that perfect animal for yourself and maybe just offer a blind or a lame animal to God instead is going to be pretty great. But the text says doing so is detestable. It establishes right out of the gate that you absolutely cannot give God your leftovers. Moving right along to section 2, idolatry and two witnesses, rooting out evil. Pivoting to verses 2 through 7, the text addresses the absolute greatest threat to this newly forming nation, which is breaking the covenant by turning to other gods. Verses 2 and 3 specifically define idolatry as worshiping other gods, including bowing down to the sun, the moon, or the stars of the sky. But what's truly fascinating here is the legal process that follows. If a man or woman is reported to be practicing idolatry, verse 4 commands the community to investigate the matter thoroughly. They can't just act on hearsay. This is absolutely crucial. Even for the worst crime imaginable in this society, literally treason against God, there is zero tolerance for mob justice. There has to be a careful, deliberate legal inquiry. And here is where the text establishes a foundational principle of justice. If the thorough investigation finds the accusation is actually true, the punishment is incredibly severe. The person is taken to the city gate, which, by the way, was the public courthouse of the ancient world, and stoned to death. But there is a massive legal safeguard built into verse 6. To prevent false executions, the text strictly mandates that the severe punishment of stoning at the city gate can only happen on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, never ever just one. A single person's accusation is absolutely powerless to convict someone of a capital crime. This completely protects individuals from malicious, false witnesses who might just have a personal vendetta against them. This all builds into an incredible psychological deterrent against lying in court. Verse 7 outlines the steps of the execution. It says the hands of the witnesses must be the first in putting him to death, and then the hands of all the people. So to ensure witnesses take their testimony with absolute gravity, these witnesses must be the very first to act out the severe punishment, purging the evil from the community. You can't just whisper a lie to the judge and then walk away. If your testimony condemns a person to death, you must be the one to physically cast the first stone. This forces absolute accountability on the witnesses. The text concludes this section by saying, "You must purge the evil from among you." Let's look at section 3, the Supreme Judicial Court, establishing law and order. Verses 8 through 13 establish what is essentially an ancient Supreme Court for difficult legal disputes. So we've seen how clear-cut cases are handled at the local city gates. But what happens when local judges are just totally stumped? Verse 8 lists the exact types of difficult cases: bloodshed, lawsuits, or assaults.
Now, bloodshed might mean trying to determine the difference between intentional murder and accidental manslaughter. Lawsuits or pleas deal with highly complex civil disputes between neighbors. Assaults or strokes deal with physical injuries and figuring out exactly who is at fault. When local town elders just cannot figure it out, the system doesn't just shrug its shoulders.
Instead, the text requires the disputing parties to escalate things. They have to go to the ultimate religious and judicial authorities, the Levite priests and the presiding judge, to get a final, binding ruling. Verse 8 says, "You must take them to the place the Lord your God will choose." This centralized location creates a single, unified standard of law for the whole nation. You bring the case to the priests, who are Levites, and to the judge who is in office at that particular time. You inquire of them, they investigate the whole thing, and they hand down the final verdict. This is literally the highest court in the land, a panel of experts in both the law of the covenant and civil jurisprudence. So the absolutely crucial point here is what happens after that verdict is given. Verses 10 through 13 are incredibly strict about this. You must act according to the decision they give you. The text emphasizes, do not turn aside from what they tell you to the right or to the left. But what if someone loses the case and arrogantly refuses to accept the Supreme Court's decision? Well, verse 12 tells us that the man who shows contempt for the judge or priest must be put to death. Showing contempt for this high court's decision is a capital offense. This uncompromising authority ensures that society doesn't just descend into chaos. It makes the people fear acting presumptuously. Think about it. If people could just ignore the final court, the entire legal system would collapse into complete anarchy. By purging this contempt, verse 13 says, all the people will hear and be afraid. Which brings us to section 4, Laws of the Israelite King, the Constitutional Monarchy. In verses 14 through 17, the chapter really reaches its climax by detailing rules for the ultimate executive power, the king. In almost every other ancient culture, the king was literally considered a god. But here, the king is firmly under the law. Anticipating that the Israelites will eventually want a king just like the surrounding nations, God permits it, but lays down some very strict boundaries in verse 15. First, he must be the king that God chooses. Second, he must be from among your own brothers. You absolutely cannot place a foreigner over the nation. This ensures that the leader of Israel is bound by the exact same history, the same covenant, and the same laws as the people he's leading. A foreign king would bring foreign gods and foreign interests, fundamentally compromising the very soul of the nation. Now, once the king is chosen, his power is immediately restricted. And what is so brilliant about this text is how it outlines an ancient system of checks and balances. It severely limits his military might, his diplomatic alliances through marriage, and his personal wealth. Look at verse 16. He must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. In the ancient world, horses and chariots were the ultimate weapons of war. Multiplying horses meant relying on military might rather than God. Next, verse 17, he must not take many wives or his heart will be led astray. Marrying foreign princesses meant bringing their foreign idols right into the royal court. Finally, he must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. The king is not meant to use his power to strip the nation of its wealth just to fund his own luxury. He's a servant of the people, not their owner. Section 5. The King's Torah Scroll, the ultimate check on power. Verses 18 through 20 reveal the ultimate requirement for the king, placing the law above the monarch himself. Verse 18 commands, when he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the priests who are Levites. Instead of acting as some untouchable deity, the king must physically sit down, take the master copy from the Levitical priests, and write out the words himself. Think about the profound impact of this action. He is literally writing out the rules that govern his own behavior. This physical action embeds the covenant right into the mind of the chief executive. And verses 19 and 20 explain exactly why he must keep this scroll with him and read it all the days of his life. By reading this scroll constantly, the king is reminded to remain humble, to view himself as an equal to his brothers, and to never stray from the law. The text says it is so that he learns to revere God, follows the decrees carefully, and honestly, this is the most beautiful part of the passage to me, so that he not consider himself better than his brothers. The king is just a brother with a very specific job. He is not a superior species of human. If he keeps his humility and obeys the law, the text promises that he and his descendants will reign a long time over his kingdom. Finally, Section 6. Practical Life Lessons, applying Chapter 17 today. Now, while we may not be ancient Israelite kings or judges, the human behaviors addressed in this chapter are totally universal. Let's look at the simple, practical life lessons we can draw from these ancient instructions to improve ourselves today. First, bring your best. Just as a flawed sacrifice was detestable, we should strive to bring our absolute, flawless, uncompromised effort to our spiritual lives and our daily work. Second, impartial truth. The rule of 2 or 3 witnesses teaches us never to rely on a single source of gossip or hearsay. We have to seek undeniable proof before we pass judgment on others. Third, respect authority. A functioning society requires an ultimate arbiter. We must respect the final decisions of our systems of justice rather than acting presumptuously. And finally, check your ego. The restrictions on the king teach us that true leadership isn't about hoarding wealth, power, or status. It is about humbly viewing yourself as no better than your brothers and sisters, governed by the exact same ethical laws as everyone else. I'll leave you with this final provocative thought inspired by the King's Scroll. How does writing down your core principles keep your own ego in check today? Imagine if every modern leader had to handwrite a constitution of ethics and actually read it every single morning. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.